quite clear by the screen, I'm Jamie, and I'm duly supported by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Craig White. But before we go into introducing ourselves, I think really what we wanted to kind of emphasise for you this evening is indeed what the aims are. So I think we've really got three aims for this evening. Firstly, that you enjoy it. I guess that's the primary aim. But in all seriousness, we really want to demonstrate the importance of the social aspects, social psychology, and how leadership and so forth can influence groups and resilience. We also want to think about how to build a sense of togetherness within the team and group setting. We'll be drawing upon our experiences from the military and from sport about how we can essentially do this. And then we'll also share with you some reflections on delivering a series of togetherness-based interventions, as we've mentioned already within the context of the military and sport. So that's what we're hoping to get out of it this evening. I'm now just going to pass over to Craig just for some introductions.
Hi everybody, I'm Craig White. I'm currently a research fellow at Loughborough, funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and my year's fellowship is looking at promoting military veterans' mental health and well-being. I came to academia quite late in life. I had a 24-year career in the RAF where I reached the rank of wing commander. I specialised in learning and development, and as part of my time in the RAF, I was very fortunate to be seconded to Loughborough to complete a PhD with Jamie as my supervisor, looking at resilience in leadership in the RAF. During my time in the service, I completed a wide variety of tours, including the pinnacle of my time in the military was a operational deployment to Afghanistan in 2012 to work alongside the Afghan National Police, and that's really where subconsciously I came to know about the power of groups. I commanded 120 people. It was a multinational team, so there were Americans, Australians and Romanians. We were based in Kandahar province, which for those who don't know is the home of the Taliban. So the security situation was quite challenging, shall I say. There were attacks both on people who worked for me and the bases that I looked after. So I looked after 4 training bases, a recruit collection point. I was also in charge of infrastructure, logistics, HR and finance for the Afghan National Police. So it was there that instinctively I tried to bring the groups together. So we had a commanders conference both on the coalition side, where the first time that everybody from the training bases, the commanders had met each other, and we facilitated the same for the Afghans. So when I met Jamie and he suggested that I research social identity leadership, it kind of all came together for me. So I medically retired last year with complex mental health issues, knee and back injuries, and I made my way into academia. And now I'll pass you over to Jamie to introduce himself.
Thanks, Craig. So yeah, just a bit of a brief overview and perhaps how I got to this point. So I'm a senior lecturer in sport and exercise psychology here at Loughborough University, and have a research profile, I guess, within the areas of stress, group dynamics, wellbeing and mental health. In terms of my academic career, secured over £1 million in research funding to generally support programmes within the English Institute of Sport, that was now the UK Sport Institute, the Football Association, the England and Wales Cricket Board, WADA, the Armed Forces Covenant Trust and the ESRC. And I've been fortunate enough to work with many great collaborators, but have authored over 85 scholarly publications and 6 books. And I think as we sort of go into the talk this evening, I think it's fair to say that, the programme of research that we are going to discuss is really Craig's, I guess, been the driving force behind it, duly supported by myself, but also supported by Professor Matt Slater over at Staffordshire University as well. So we're going to just start off by introducing you to 2 concepts, I guess, that really kind of underpin this notion of togetherness that we're going to be talking about. And the first concept is social identity. And I think a really good way of thinking about this, apologies for the photograph there, that was another bad hair day. You'll see a trend as we go through the presentation this evening. But I think when we start to think of ourselves and what make up ourselves, there is ultimately our personal identities, and these are the things that make the I or make the me. But there are also things that make up, I guess, the kind of the we or the us. And maybe just turning a few people off, but for my sins, I am a lifelong Manchester United fan who, despite what people say, are the greatest football team in Manchester, despite what the Blue Half might have done in recent weeks. But I think it's really interesting that when we think of our identities, we not only have this personal identity, the I and the me, but we also have the we and the us, these social identities. And through these groups that we're a part of, through these social groups that we participate within and that we engage with, they help to really sort of define our wider sense of identity. So maybe if people were unfortunate enough to sit next to me at Old Trafford, they would see a very different Jamie versus the Jamie that is a chartered sport and exercise psychologist and an academic. And of course, the behaviours that we elicit are often quite congruent with the groups that we're a part of. But I think it's a really interesting point that often we can think in isolation about the I and the me, and sometimes we can ignore that our sense of purpose, our sense of well-being is often facilitated and is often influenced by the groups, by the clubs, by the teams that we're a part of. So that's the first concept that Craig and I kind of wanted to introduce you to this evening, this idea of social identities and social and group memberships. And when we think about a theoretical underpinning for this has been largely influenced by the work of Tajfel and Turner in the 1970s. But more recently, Professor Alex Haslam down at the University of Queensland and colleagues have really given a resurgence to this area and started to think about how it can be applied to not only, I guess, the general public, but could also be used to help us to explain intra-group processes within the concepts of business, within the concepts of sport, and within the context of the military. I think what does this really look like in action? So a really good illustration of a kind of, I guess, what we call in a we and us culture are indeed the New Zealand All Blacks. And you know, what we might know about the New Zealand All Blacks is, apart from the Australian women's cricket team, they are the most successful team in world sports. Their success rate is ridiculous. They typically win so many more games than they lose. And often what has been used to describe that is this sense of culture, this sense of we and us and togetherness that kind of binds the New Zealand All Blacks together. And James Kerr infamously wrote in his book about the New Zealand All Blacks that within that New Zealand, that All Black dressing room, they talk about being a part of something that has a higher purpose. They talk about that being a part of the New Zealand All Blacks is kind of represents so many other things than just playing a game of rugby and just being a New Zealander. It represents a Maori culture. It represents a legacy. And there's lots of things that kind of evolve around the New Zealand All Blacks. The idea that we only ever inherit the shirt, or we only ever sort of inherit the shirt for a small period of time before then we pass it on to somebody else. So we never keep it. We have it for a period of time, and it's our role and responsibility as an All Black to improve that shirt for the greater good of New Zealand rugby. So that's kind of what these things might look like in action. And as I said, as a lifelong Manchester United fan, one of the things under David Moyes' tenure, which was really quite interesting, and clearly I need to get out a little bit more, was that in his press conferences, in his brief tenure at the club, he would tend to use the phrases like they and them when referring to his own teammates versus we and us. And sometimes the subtleties in language really represent and really tell us quite a bit about how embedded the leader or the captain is within the group, but also how representative they are of the wider group itself. So that's the first concept that we wanted to introduce you to. And I'm now going to pass over to Craig to talk you through the second concept.
Thanks, Jamie. So the second concept that we would like to introduce to you is around resilience. And so firstly, I'd like to define what the academic literature has to say about what it is. So firstly, to be resilient, there needs to be some form of adversity, risk, or stressor. In the early days, a lot of the resilience work back in the 70s was looking at why some children from really deprived areas succeeded and why others didn't. And they came up with this notion that those that had succeeded were resilient. So again, in the early work, they talked mostly about significant life events, and this could be the death of a significant other or a close family member. It could be around divorce. It could be around serious injury. But latterly, this has moved on to look at also the stresses of life and how it can be a cumulative effect, whereby the little stresses all add up to turn into adversity. So that's the first bit. The second bit, in order to be considered resilience, there must be some form of positive adaptation. Now, it's accepted that there can be a dip in normal functioning when faced with risk and adversity. But the idea, particularly in high performance areas like the military and sport, that this dip is as shallow and as quick as possible. So it's the idea of both bouncing back, so returning back to normal functioning as quickly as possible. But authors latterly have suggested the idea of resilient growth, that by going through adversity, we take the learnings and we embody those. And then when we're faced with adversity in the future, that it does less harm and we're more resilient. It can also go the other way. So there can be a sensitizing effect whereby encountering risk and adversity can lower your resilience. So a key point in the literature is that resilience is dynamic. So it changes. It can change through your life. It can change due to different environments. We can be resilient in one area of our life, but less resilient in others. The third key element are the protective and promotive factors that can help either buffer us from adversity and risk or protect us. And through the work that Jamie and I have done, we've looked at 5 of these internal and external factors. So we looked at adaptability, how we regulate our emotions, how optimistic people are, our self-efficacy, and also crucially for what we're talking about in terms of social groups, the social support. Now, the literature would say that perceived social support is more powerful than actual social support. So that's a key thing to bear in mind.
Next slide.
Yes, please. So we looked as part of our work both at psychological but also social resilience, which is less well known. And this is all about our ability to develop, engage in, and then maintain positive relationships that then help us to recover and endure life stresses and social isolation. Slide. So why is this important? Well, there was a meta-analysis done on factors that influence mortality, and having stronger social relations led to a 50% increase in the likelihood of survival. And it was as important or greater in importance than some other more well-known risk factors such as smoking, alcohol consumption, obesity, and physical activity. Now, the interesting thing about this is some research was done with the general population and to rank which factors were most important. And through that, the social aspect always came at the bottom. So we're trying to get out the message that social identity, the social groups that we belong to, is important for our health and well-being. Slide. So why is it important and how does it improve our health and well-being? Well, it does this by a bit like Jamie was talking about with the All Blacks. It provides us a sense of meaning and purpose. We feel appreciated. We feel like we belong to the group. We feel respected and supported, and there's an element of trust. So all these mechanisms mean that the social groups that we belong to can be positive for our health and well-being. Slide.
Sorry, and just to quickly add onto that, I think it's in our work within sport and other high-performing contexts, what we often find is that some younger athletes often have quite limited group memberships. They often specialise in a particular activity, whether it be music, academia, drama, or sport, and often compromise other social groups because sometimes they feel as though to be the best, they have to put everything into that particular group. And what we know through the data is that should that particular group not be successful, things not work out, and an athlete get injured, and if they only have limited social groups there, we know that can be particularly harmful for people's recovery, but also their long-term mental health and well-being. And we'll talk about this in a little bit further on, but this also relates to, as we'll see, military veterans and people that retire and people that transition between different environments, going from primary school to high school, going from one team to another team, going from college or school to university.
So the first study that we did as part of my PhD was all about social group memberships. So 243 personnel took part in the study, and they were across a range of 18 bases. So that covered training, combat, support bases. So we got those 243 people to do two things. One, that they created a social identity map, which Jamie will talk about in more detail in a minute, and they ranked their social group memberships by how important they were, how positive they were, how compatible they were with each other, and how they felt representative of belonging to that group. They also did a questionnaire that looked at their own resilience, their relationship with their immediate line manager, and their sense of belonging to their immediate work group. So this is the slide that we showed people undertaking the social identity mapping to give them an idea of what groups we were talking about. So as you can see from the slide, it could be family and friends, and that could be divided up to close family, extended family, work friends, school friends, university friends. It also brings in work and professional groups that people belong to, any hobby and interest groups that they're part of, sport and leisure groups, or community groups.
And when we kind of get people to do this task, and you know, because we're really generous and kind people, we want you to do some homework if you choose to do so. But you may indeed want to create your own maps for yourself around the groups that you are a part of. And as part of that process, you may also want to think about how compatible those groups are. So often we see that work and family and friends are sometimes not particularly compatible, but also how positive those particular groups are. How positive is it being a part of a particular social group or team or sport? And often what we find is when people do this exercise, they broadly fall into one of three camps. They would probably have, or most, but some people will have quite a simple social identity map, which is displayed on the left-hand side there, which will encompass kind of family, friends, and work, or school, or college. And that's generally what some people might have. On the other hand, we might have what we would call a moderately complex social identity map, which comprises of maybe 5 or possibly 6 groups. And as you can see there, the straighter the line, that indicates the more compatibility between the groups. The more squiggly the line, that means that there's a bit of incompatibility between those two groups. So often, as I say, family and work, they're often kind of at loggerheads with one another. If we kind of then delve into the broader literature around this, what we generally see in the literature, there's kind of a bit of a sweet spot for number of group memberships being helpful for mental health and well-being, and kind of helping to protect us against things like work and life stress. And normally what we see there is the sweet spot being between 5 and 6 groups. And it's not an exact science, but as I say, lots of data would kind of indicate to that particular sweet spot. And as I mentioned a moment ago, sometimes in younger academy athletes, often their group memberships are quite small. And in some circumstances, our experiences would tell us that some people can find it really difficult to name any group memberships at all. And often that would obviously be a concern. So if you're a coach, if you're a teacher, if you're working with people in kind of a group environment scenario, doing an identity map with them is not only helpful as part of some form of induction process, but it's also helpful to understand the social support network that an individual may have around them or may not have around them. And of course, then it gives us a point of intervention with which to help them to widen their social support network, or, as the case may be in this example, to maybe get rid of some groups, because we speak about 5 to 6 groups being optimal. And of course, if we get to sort of 8 and 10 groups, then really good luck in trying to deal with all those groups, because actually this is where group memberships become almost counterproductive, because trying to be a part of all of those is equally more stressful than the benefit that you get from being a part of them. So doing an identity map isn't just about saying, oh, which groups do I want to get rid of? And I remember once somebody saying to me that, you know, they scored their family as not particularly positive. Could they get rid of their family? Well, that's indeed your decision and your choice. We wouldn't encourage people to do that, of course, but it's a really insightful process of where people can reflect on, you know, maybe they're a part of they volunteer for a particular group. They've done it for many, many years, but in terms of the positivity it gives them, perhaps it maybe diminishes their energy, and their mental health resources. So hopefully that makes some sort of sense, and we'll come back to the homework and the takeaways later on regarding the identity map. But I'm going to pass over to Craig now just to kind of wrap up, I guess, this segment around the data that we got from this study one.
So there were two main outcomes really from study one. The first one, as Jamie has alluded to, it was how positive you feel about the groups that was associated with resilience. So the more positive groups that people belong to, the greater their resilience. And we also found that this sense of togetherness with, in this case, their immediate work team, was also associated with greater resilience. So we moved this forward when we talk later on about the interventions that we've used, that these are two key things that led into the shape of those interventions. So second study, where we had a combined sample of 258 RAF personnel who did an online questionnaire twice, 6 months apart. And what we asked them about again was their resilience and their bond with their line manager and their sense of togetherness with their immediate work group. And what we wanted to look at was this connection between bond with your group and sense of togetherness. Did that predict resilience, and did it maintain its influence 6 months later? So if we go to the next slide. So what we saw, that resilience increases and sustains over time when first you have a good working relationship with your line manager, and then you have a strong bond with your team. So we saw that these two mechanisms meant that both resilience increased, and then that increase was maintained 6 months later. So when we talk about, and Jamie and I are both applied psychologists, that when we talk about turning this theory into practice and designing interventions to increase resilience, using this sense of togetherness and the bond with a line manager was two important aspects. So this leads on to my final and third study, where we designed a Leading for Resilience program based on the two studies done previously and the academic literature. Initially, we had 3 intervention groups, which were at squadron level, so around about 120 people. And we had a comparison group because we wanted to know whether the changes that we found in the intervention groups were different to those found in the comparison group, who did all of the questionnaires at the same intervals but didn't get the intervention. Unfortunately, COVID happened and the lockdown came, and the university wouldn't let me out of the house to go and do the workshops. So only one of the groups completed the full program. And as I said at the start, it was based on social identity leadership theory and the application and the studies that went before. So the intervention groups, so the one that completed the program did 3 workshops over a 6-month period. And what we did in those workshops was, firstly, we created a set of shared values for the group. So these weren't values that came top down, that were given to the group. We brought the group together and they created a set of values from the bottom up. So the leader of the squadron, the wing commander, got the same amount of votes on the values as the lowest ranking member of the team. So once we created this set of values, which are normally around 4 to 6, we then got the individuals to come up with congruent behaviours. And again, it was about 4 or 5. So what did that value look like in practice in the work environment? Which behaviours represented those values? And then we did a team vision, and this wasn't that they wanted to be the best combat air squadron in the Air Force. This was a team vision about how they were going to work together as a team. And they talked about how they would support each other and how openness and honesty was key to how they worked. And finally, they came up with an implementation plan whereby there was some quick wins of stuff that could be done easily, and there were some other things that were more medium and long term. But this was key in turning what they'd done in the workshops into some practical actions that could be delivered. So for instance, at the entrance and exit to the squadron, there are massive posters with their values on and their team vision statement. They also put their values at the bottom of everybody's signature block on their emails. And this was one way of bringing the values to life. Next slide, please. So what we found was the Leading for Resilient program increased the sense of togetherness within that team, which our previous research had shown can lead to increases in resilience. So I'll let you read the quotes, but it's the process of going through the workshops. They felt more united, they felt valued, they felt appreciated, they realized that their opinion was valued and that it brought the team together. Next slide.
Okay, so Craig there has really nicely spoken about, I guess, the application of a togetherness-based intervention, I guess, within the concept of the Royal Air Force. I'm now just going to share with you some work from sport, and then what we'll move on in the final little bit then is, I guess, a culmination of not only Craig's program of research, but the wider research that we've been doing in this area that then led us to work with some veterans and develop a program specific to a veteran cohort. So this is just some work that that we did in the concepts of Paralympic football, and sort of dates back to around about 2015. I was approached to take on the role as a sports psychologist to what was the England cerebral palsy team, which latterly became Team GB as we qualified for the Paralympics. And it was a really cool opportunity because what it gave us was really kind of like a 2-year lead in from 2015 all the way through to the Paralympics to really put some togetherness-based work in place and to kind of evaluate that over a prolonged period of time. One of the main limitations, of course, of working with one group is that is the only data that you can collect. It's very difficult to collect, I guess, comparison and or control group data. But what we tried to do was to really understand what change was happening within this particular group of individuals that we were working with. And I think the other cool piece of it as well was that, so while I was the sports psychologist working with the team, Matt Slater came in and sort of co-facilitated the sessions that we did around togetherness as kind of an outsider perspective. So it enabled him and me to really just sort of discuss how this intervention was landing in the real world. And also as well, just it was good for me to get an external perspective on kind of what he was seeing, because obviously I was quite immersed in that environment. So that the whole process was really underpinned by what Alex Haslam and colleagues called the 3 R's. And I'm plugging Matt's book here, so if anything, I'm looking for some royalties on the back of this shameless plug. But Matt has written a wonderful book called Togetherness. I always hammer him about it as being a book on togetherness, but as a single author, so there's some sort of irony in that. But ultimately, there's a 3R process that we went through based around social identity theory to really build, I guess, a strong sense of togetherness within this particular group. And each of the R's represents, I guess, a key point of the intervention. The first R is about reflecting. So here we always encourage the leader, the captain, I guess the line manager, whatever role they have, to really take time to understand your team, who they are, what is unique about them, what is our history, what are our values. And often in our work, we find that this is the bit that's often scantily done. It's scooted over. People don't always have the time and the energy to invest in this. But where they can really build up an understanding of those things, it really then lays the solid foundation for the next phases. So once we kind of have all that information in the reflect stage, we can then, as leaders and facilitators, then start to represent. So as a leader, as a leadership group, we start to role model these team values, and we start to really champion team interests. So we would argue that an in-group leader will always put the we before the me. They will always propose new ideas that is for the greater good of the group, rather than for self-promotion or for sort of, I guess, personal reasons. And I guess the next phase then is that, you know, once we've gone through that representing, the role modeling, the champion, people then start to realise the leaders, the leadership group then live out these shared values in terms of their plans, their strategic plans, activities, and of course they're then really trying to work towards and drive the ambitions of the collective vision. Just adding a little bit more finesse to that, I guess, the 3 R's, and Alex eloquently said that in this approach, the power of groups is unlocked by working with social identities, not across or against them. So I think really what that speaks to is the idea of, if we understand the reasons why people are a part of this particular group, what it means to them to be a part of this team, we can then start to harness that. So in our work in professional football, in elite sport, when going into those environments, one of the first things that we would do, if we're utilising this approach, is to ask people, why are you at this club? What does it mean to you to be a part of this team? And these are often quite weird questions, and questions that people have not often been asked. But really the whole benefit is to really gain an understanding of individual motivation, individual values, and individual aspirations. And when we're kind of armed with all that information, we can really then start to use that to, I guess, galvanise and mobilise the whole team. And I think, you know, when Craig and I reflect on this, often when we've sat in big rooms and we've worked for many organisations and they launch their vision and value statements to you, sometimes you would sit there and you actually have no understanding of what these vision and value statements are, because you've not been a part of the process. Well, in this 3R process, when we launch a vision and value statement, if we've gone through the right processes, when those things are launched in an email or on a board, we should be able to connect with them. We should see some of our input into those vision and value statements because we've been a part of the journey. And therefore, in that organisation, we're more likely to work harder, to maybe be more committed, but also to feel a stronger connection with them, which I think is really, really important. And I think some of the other key points to recognise about this approach, it's not just about leaders, it's about followers. And it's not about me, it's about us. And it's not about power over as a leader, but it's about power through. And power through is generated through these connections through these relationships and by harnessing the information that leaders or leadership groups would collect around their team. So going back to the concept of the context of the Paralympic football environment, so we had collected data over 22 months, and that enabled us to collect a whole host of information regarding several concepts, I guess, to do with the extent to which people identified with that group, the extent to which they thought leadership was identity-based leadership. So did they think that the leaders were doing it for them? Did they feel that the leaders were a part of them? And also we measured this, what we would define as a mobilization of effort, because theoretically, if we have a strong connection with our team members and we have a strong connection with our leaders, we know that people are more likely to expend more effort. They're more likely to be committed. And probably one of the key drivers for our intervention was the establishment of a leadership group, which comprised senior coaches and some senior players. And I think the key thing to note there is that wasn't a fixed group. So anybody could leave or join at any moment in time. So it wasn't trying to be an exclusive elite group. It was trying to be representative. So in very quickly, I guess, the intervention comprised these 3 R's, and within that we had a pretty set format, and each sort of session, I guess, comprised around about 2 hours of working with the senior leadership group, who would then cascade the key points down to the players, and then their job was then to bring information back to these workshops. We would then use that, and that would go back down to the players, and yeah, hopefully you kind of get the point. So that was the whole journey in terms of the intervention. What did it kind of look like? Well, similar to what Craig was mentioning around the RAF context, through collaboration and through the processes that we worked through, we were able to kind of come up with 5 core values and this mission or vision statement. And you know, as you perhaps read them, that kind of means nothing to you, and I guess why would it? But because this was very relevant to the group that we were working with. But the key thing that we were keen to emphasize was that under each of those values, there were 4 behaviors that would feed into each of those values. So as a group, we would be able to self-reflect and reflect as a group and be able to rate ourselves on, I guess, the frequency and the quality of the behaviors relative to that particular value. Now, of course, in the context of sport or any high-performing environment, that's really important because we want these things to be measurable. And as a psychologist, our biggest ally in measuring outcomes is behaviors. Do we see a change in behavior? Do we see a consistency in behavior, either increasing their behavior or reducing a behavior if they're unhelpful and nasty ones? So that was really cool because we then utilized the performance analysts to help us to engage in that reflection process. So they would clip gains for us based around this sort of assessment criteria that we've had. And then we fed that back into the team meetings and into the group with a view of saying, we need more of these good behaviors. Look at these. This was fantastic. These are the behaviors we're after. We need less of these because they're not representative of the values that we've all bought into and that we're all driving towards. Okay, so I've got quite excited here. Apologies for that. So I'll move on. But broadly, what did our data kind of show? So this is quite a busy slide, but I think it's interesting to note that in terms of social identification, that is the extent to which the players identified with their group, we see that kind of statistically changed from baseline to intervention in year 1, and then again in the year 2. So we see this kind of gradual, significant change in the extent to which people are identifying with the group. So in terms of bringing people together, you know, it seems to be doing something. The other interesting thing to note is we also see a statistically significant change in the extent to which they're seeing leadership as being in group, as that the leaders are working for them and that they feel that this is an inclusive and together organization or team. And what we also, I guess, kind of sort of see, although not significant, was an increase and then a stabilization in the mobilization of effort. So this is telling us that generally between, I guess, pre and post in year 1, people are expending a little bit more effort, and then that's being maintained throughout that year too. And lastly, we asked the players to arbitrarily sort of note the extent to which they would be happy to train extra, you know, in and around the normal training camps. And what we can see there in that bottom row is that increased from around about a baseline of 8 hours to 11 hours, and then in year 2 from 9.5 hours all the way up to 11 again. So it seems that the more that we build togetherness, the more that people identify with the group, but also the more that they are likely to engage and invest greater levels of effort and commitment. So moving on to the final thread this evening then is really about the culmination of our work across military, or across the RAF and sport, which led us to the Veterans Resilience Programme, which was fantastically created by Craig and his network around, I guess, the veteran charity sector and the veteran sector. And we pulled our ideas together pre-COVID. We were successful in an Armed Forces Covenant Trust grant. And COVID kind of as most things, put a bit of a handbrake on stuff. But it meant that last year we were able to deliver this programme to a number of veterans. So I'm just going to show you a brief video. You'll be delighted that we're not going to speak for a moment. And then we'll just, I guess, finesse in a little bit more detail what we did and what we found, and maybe what the take-home messages are before opening up for some questions.
Yeah, so what we've done this week is really put a programme of events together that are really based around bringing a group of military veterans together that all suffer with mental health. And really what we've tried to do is put together a programme that includes physical activity, includes workshops around togetherness, around building connections. We've had workshops around sleep and healthy eating. And we've also done a number of physical activity exercises, including wheelchair basketball, walking football and Pilates.
The Veterans Resilience Workshop this afternoon was a healthy eating workshop. We had 3 hours where it was a mixture between classroom activities. So we were in the classroom discussing about what people's favourite foods were, how to put together a healthy diet, and this was quite interactive. And then we came down into the research kitchen and they actually got to make some healthy meals, scrambled eggs, some protein smoothie and some vegetables with hummus. And really the overall aim was for them to understand what it is that constitutes a healthy diet and how they might be able to take home some practical tips to implement that in their everyday life.
But over a very short period of time, we've seen, you know, people bonding, becoming really together, trusting each other, people disclosing very personal information that, you know, actually, you know, they're disclosing that to people they don't really know, but feeling really comfortable about that. And I think there's really been a big fun element to it.
It gets to the main things in life: sleeping, eating, friendship, and that's what most of us have lost sight of. It's life-changing and more.
So we're hoping that with the data that we've collected will show the anecdotal evidence has been that this course has really had an impact on people and their lives. So Jamie and I will be working with our partners to try and find other pots of money so that we can, one, continue running courses across the Midlands, but also so we can potentially upscale this course and deliver it nationally to help as many veterans as possible.
Let's get to these veterans when they leave the service or as soon as they've got an issue. Get them on this course, give us the money so we can help them before they're in a position where help might not help them as much as it could. So please fund this course because it's brilliant.
So one of the things that was really key to the programme was something that, again, we've been utilising a lot in sport. And there are many illustrations of sitting around a campfire, of holding team meetings, of teams being open and honest and divulging information that's quite personal to themselves, to other team members, not only as a way of, I guess, building trust and relationships, but also as a way of demonstrating vulnerability. And we know that in many groups, when those things are done, that can really facilitate the identification and togetherness that we see. So throughout the 5 days that the veterans were with us on a residential, pretty much all of the activities encompassed a level of disclosure. That is, whether it was disclosing personal stuff or reflecting on an experience, or just simply having a laugh and a joke that was shared. The whole premise was about utilising disclosure to build a sense of togetherness and to help them formulate a really positive and strong group membership that would outlive the Veterans Programme and the time that they had with us. And Craig's just going to elaborate on some of the data before we bring things to a close.
So we had two real aims for the programme. One was to help to promote a more active and healthier lifestyle, whether that be through physical activity, eating healthier, getting better sleep. But as Jamie has just alluded to, the second part of the programme was to try and bring the cohorts together individually as a really strong social group membership for those groups that would sustain beyond the end of the programme. We delivered the programme in partnership with the Royal Air Forces Association, and we were funded by the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. And we had a range of external partners that helped shape the programme: the RAF Benevolent Fund, the Royal British Legion, the NHS's Op Courage, which is the mental health services for veterans, and local and county district councils. So we started out by doing a nationwide consultation, and we had 540 responses from veterans, and that helped us shape how we delivered the course and the content of the course. Over the two courses, we had 16 military veterans, all of whom were suffering with some form of mental health and well-being issues. Some of the veterans also had physical disabilities that they were also working through. As Jamie has said, we started off with the core of the programme was a 5-day residential hosted at Loughborough's Elite Athlete Centre. And we also did a weekend follow-up to try and sustain that sense of togetherness that they felt as a team beyond the programme. Around 3 months after they did their 5-day course, they came back to Loughborough in the Elite Athlete Hotel, and we did some more activities. So we included mindfulness and an inspirational speaker. And you'll see from the picture that the group was spoken to by an elite boxer, Richard Riakporhe, who relayed his personal journey of coming from a deprived area of southeast London to be the first of his family to go to university, of being stabbed in the streets, and how he took to boxing and how that had propelled him to a different level. Next slide, please. So what happened as a result of the programme? Well, the questionnaire data that we got showed us that there were statistically significant increases in resilience, the sense of togetherness, and most notably in mental health and well-being. So in terms of that healthier and more active lifestyle, you'll see the pictures on the right-hand side of the screen. 3 of the veterans through the programme decided to attend the Invictus Games trials. They then went off to Las Vegas, as part of a Great Britain team to compete at the US Air Force trials. And one of the members is a reserve for the Invictus Games. Another has just been selected to represent Great Britain at the World Parapentathlon World Championships later this year. So that's the quantitative data. In terms of the qualitative results and the impact of the course, I'll let you read these quotes yourselves, but the essence is that some of the veterans found the programme life-saving and life-changing. And when Jamie and I embarked on this programme, our aim was to help just one veteran. If we could help just one veteran live a happier and healthier life, we would be happy. So it blew us away, really, the feedback that we got. It was such an honour and a privilege to work with these veterans, to receive this feedback. And we've had a call with a couple of the veterans this week, and that there were tears in the audience as they described what the programme had meant to them and their lives and how they'd changed. So in terms of being more active and living a healthier life, you can see from these quotes that the programme gave the veterans the motivation and the confidence that they were lacking to engage in physical activity and healthier behaviours. And we can all, especially as we get older, that we're not as quick or as strong or as fit as we once were. And rather than not doing anything at all, just realizing that that you can still do some stuff. And so this really is the essence of what we're trying to get across, is this impact. And I'll hand over to Jamie.
So just conscious of time and true to form, Craig and I have never finished on time. So we have been true to form, and apologies for running over. But I think some of the key messages and takeaways are from what we've spoken to you this evening are that meaningful social identities and positive group memberships are indeed important factors for influencing not only resilience, but mental health, and also the social support networks that individuals have. We also know from our research and the wider literature that togetherness is an important consideration, particularly with vulnerable groups where social identities may have been lost, for example, in veterans, the elderly, the retired, or injured athletes. And as we promised, maybe a bit of a homework activity is to undertake a social identity map for yourself. Create your own maps, have a look at the groups that you have a look at how positive they are, have a look at how compatible they are. And maybe the reflection is that either I've got too many groups and they're pretty negative, or I haven't got enough, and therefore maybe I should look at widening my social support network and my group.